Hi everyone and welcome to the video. So this is a video about some things to consider if you are seeing schools debating competitions. I make the assumption in this video that you know a bit about debating, know a bit about judging. You haven't necessarily CA'd things before, but that you might have CA'd things before at schools or university level, and that you probably have a rough idea of what's expected of CAs. This is just sort of some things that I think aren't given enough attention, or maybe some things that are done slightly incorrectly, or sort of things I see in CA teams that I think need a bit of tweaking. To be clear, then, if you're a teacher who is about to run a debating competition, like a friendly one at your school, this probably isn't a video for you. This is more a video of someone who's maybe been asked to see sort of a slightly larger, maybe university-run schools BP competition, such as LSE schools or Edinburgh schools or something like that. Um, if you are a teacher who's about to run a debating competition, the one of the most important things is to try and get as many good quality judges as you can. Pick some very basic motions. Don't be too ambitious if you don't know how to stress test motions, which you probably don't. Um, Learn how to tab or find someone who does know how to tab, or at the very least power pair. Be familiar with the platform. Be familiar with standing orders. Allow more time than you think you'll need, and try very hard to run to schedule. Yeah. Oh, isn't that easy? All right. So, some considerations for CAing schools competitions then. Okay, so if you've been asked to CA a competition, I think it's really worthwhile to ask yourself the question and potentially ask the convener the question: what type of competition is this, and what are the goals of this competition? Competitions are not all created equal in schools debating. Some are more hardcore competitions, and they're really about stressing and stretching the top debaters in the country. Some are much more novice friendly, and some are for juniors, some are for older kids. Some have very high percentage of sort of state schools participating or non-debate schools participating. Some are just catering to the same 8 private schools every year. And I'm not making a judgment about which of these competitions is better or worse. I just think that probably the type of judges and the motions that you aim to employ should be different. I think as well as a CA, it's really good to know your judges, even if that means just asking them a 5-part questionnaire that takes a minute to complete, like multiple choice, on the morning of, to find out not just how much debating experience a judge has, but the type of debating experience and if they have other experience with young people. Bear in mind that if someone has broken at a couple university debating competitions, like legitimately, as in they weren't carried there, and has broken at a few competitions as a judge as well, they're probably debatey enough to adjudicate most schools' rooms reasonably well. Because schools debating is, on the whole, a lot weaker than university debating. So, what you really want to be considering in terms of judge quality, once someone has passed that sort of basic threshold of knowing what BP debating is how good are they with kids? Can they communicate? Can they have a laugh with kids? Can they explain things to them? Are they likely to have a reasonable grasp on what is appropriate and inappropriate when talking to kids? Are they going to be able to interact like maturely with teachers? And part of that is coming from, do you work regularly with kids as a tutor or in any other context, or have you literally not encountered teenagers since you left high school? Right? Those are good things to know about your judge. Um, and the more that you know your judges, which are sort of like your staff at a competition, the better your event will be. And lastly, if you can do things to make this competition a little bit more fun, as a CA, I know this is kind of a convening thing as well, but CAs have influence on how fun a competition can be. The type of motions that you run, playing songs during the draw that give you a hint towards emotion, encouraging like funny team names or having like special mentions for, I don't know, like the most outlandish point or the most interesting introduction or something like that. These are it is good when debating competitions are fun events and feel like days out and not like extra homework or a revision class. You know, I treat my going to competition with my students very much as like a field trip, a day out. I bring games like Dobble to play in between rounds, and we have a laugh. It's not like we're all going there in our school uniform, like, all right, kids, it's about winning. Settle down, read The Economist in between rounds. Like, that's not cool. We don't want that. So cater to that fun atmosphere as a CA if you can. I think as a CA, it's really important to remember that if you're giving a speaker briefing, you aren't giving it for all the kids there. You're giving it for the kids there who don't know what that is going on. Because kids who have been to 10, 15, 20, 30 competitions, you're not going to tell them anything new in a speaker briefing, right? They're probably not listening to you because they've heard 10 speaker briefings before and they're quite dull. So what you're aiming this at is the kids who are in their first, second, third competition and are really scared. And that means cement the basics. And I mean, knowing what BP is useful, but even just things like try to avoid assertions, try to have some structure, try to explain why things are true and important. Um, Something I find really weird about speakers briefings, I think it's because often speakers briefings they go team by team, but then they run out of time because a speakers briefing shouldn't really last more than 10 minutes, and so they spend too much time on OG and never get to CO. There's a lot of time spent on mechanisms and definitions. When most schools competitions set motions that don't require a lot of definition, and that's right because unclear debates are obviously a nightmare to participate in and judge, and motions that require a lot of definition are often going to result in dumpster fire debates in a schools competition. So I'd say you can set ambitious motions um, in a schools competition without setting ambiguous motions. And so if you're not going to set a lot of ambiguous motions, then kids don't have to do a lot of defining. So why, whenever I see a speakers briefing, do people talk about definitions so much? Because kids get freaked out about it, and often they latch on to and sort of misinterpret well-meaning instructions. Like when you tell kids that they have to define what a zoo is in this house with banned zoos, that is explicitly bad instruction as far as I'm concerned. Because my instruction would be, if the motion is this house with banned zoos, you don't need to define anything because everyone knows what the debate is. You only need to define and explain things if the motion is ambiguous. Because kids will get tripped up on definitions and they'll waste their prep time on it and they won't come up with arguments. And ultimately, we want them, particularly for novices and intermediates, to focus on trying to argue things, not to like define what a zoo is, right? Because it's weirdly difficult to define words sometimes if you're a kid. Like, so you can know what a zoo is, but if you have to actually give a definition of a zoo, that takes like 3, 4 minutes of your prep time, and that's a lot of your prep time if you're PM. And lastly, in a speaker's briefing, I'd really just appreciate it if CAs reassured kids very directly that like this is a game. It is a silly, idiotic, weird game that we all play. It's bizarre. It's very useful, very fun, very emotional sometimes, but it's a game. And just relax the kids a little bit by letting them know that this is for fun. So we don't have to take it too seriously because a lot of kids take debating way too seriously, and so do a lot of teachers. So they could be reminded of that as well. So I've done a whole video on the type of feedback I think that judges should be giving at schools competitions. So I think in a judge briefing you should basically be saying those things. Try to remind your judges that feedback should only be about 10 minutes long. I was at a competition the other weekend where a judge gave 48 minutes of feedback, and like what? Um, Please tell the judges to pitch appropriately, in terms of the words they use. You may be in your second year of Oxford studying philosophy and therefore very, very intelligent and very articulate. Um, Not all 14-year-olds are, so just talk in a way that they'll be able to understand. It's really important to tell kids things that they did well, not just to make them feel good or because it's nice, but because if a kid does two things well and two things badly, and you tell them the two things they did badly, then next round they're focused on the two things they did badly, but they don't know to do the two things they did well the same way. And so they potentially won't do it the same way, and then they've got another thing they need to work on. If you only tell kids the things that they do badly, then when they do it right, they don't know like, oh no, stop, you had it that time. Don't go in that do that again. So that's really, really important. And as I've said before, call justification usually not the best form of feedback um, for I would say about 70 to 80% of schools debates. Um, yeah, top rooms, sure. The rest of them, no. So motions. I think that the most important thing to understand about motions is when you stress test a motion, you are stress testing it for the participants, not objectively. Right now, it may be the case that if you're stress testing a motion for Euros, then you are stress testing objectively in the sense of, okay, assuming that everyone in the debate is an amazing debater, is this motion balanced? And that's a fine consideration for Euros finals, maybe even for Euros in rounds. But it's not a fine consideration for a schools competition because it doesn't matter if really, really good debaters have an equal chance of coming first, second, third, fourth in every position in this motion if the school kids actually doing the motion don't have an equal chance. An emotion can be very balanced at university and very imbalanced at schools because some arguments are much more accessible to kids and some arguments much less accessible to kids. An emotion can be balanced in a senior schools competition and very imbalanced in a junior schools competition for the same reasons. Now, obviously, what that means is that you might be setting a motion knowing that it's balanced in the top rooms, it's a little imbalanced in the middle rooms, and it's completely imbalanced in the bottom rooms. In which case, I wouldn't set it. A motion probably can't be perfectly balanced across all rooms in a schools competition because there is such a big variety of ability at schools competitions. But there are motions that are explicitly massively imbalanced at schools level because kids don't have particular type are likely to have particular holes in knowledge and are also likely to have particular depths of knowledge about certain things. Kids know a lot about social media, and a lot of kids at debate might know a lot about gay rights and like feminism. They might know a lot about the Second World War for UK kids because we study that a lot. But there are certain things that a lot of kids just don't have a lot of grasp on. One of those is economics because it's not a commonly offered subject at GCSE in England or Nat 4 in Scotland. So a lot of economics motions are going to be really imbalanced if there is an intuitive, you don't have to know anything about economics to get this argument in one position, and the other position you would have to know some basic economics to get to the arguments. All this being said, what it ultimately means is that in order to appropriately stress test emotion at a schools competition, you have to have a reasonable understanding of the types of participants in your competition, their age, their ability, and like what the average 16-year-old in the country you're running this competition in knows, what the average 16-year-old debater knows. That's one of the reasons why CAs in schools competitions should be people on the school circuit, people who judge a lot of schools things, people who coach or teach, or were themselves schools debaters quite recently. People who have got 20 breaks at university debating and like just made the semis of Euros but haven't judged more than one schools competition in this country in the last year might have a really, really bad grasp of what a kid is likely to know and not know, and therefore might inappropriately stress test emotion and end up setting a motion that is very imbalanced. And that's just a bit unfair. So try to think about that as a CA. If you don't have an idea of what the average participant knows, then find someone who does and chat to them about your emotions. Uh, So I'm going to talk about equity a lot more in the video about convening or running schools competitions because CAs are not meant to be equity officers and vice versa. But I'm just going to say this really quickly. Equity is the most important thing at a schools debating competition. And if you don't think it is, you need to not be running schools debating competitions. Right? They're children. Safeguarding is what matters. Equity is what matters. Like yeah, but we wanted to get someone who had a lot of breaks at Euros. Shut up. The well-being of the children is always the number one priority in any educational endeavour. And if you don't agree with that, get another hobby. Therefore, and I'm sorry, this is not meant to be an attack on any existing equity officer. There's genuinely no one in mind when I'm saying this. Equity cannot be a token job for like a well-meaning fresher who loves schools debating, or like even worse, like the one like minority pal you have. This has happened. Don't pretend it hasn't. Um, yes, I think as a straight white man that on balance I would rather equity officers were more female than male, and lent towards BAME more than white. But equity is hard to do well, and safeguarding is something that you have to be qualified in, and you can't just pick someone because they're nice, like or someone because you're like, oh, they're gonna come judge, we might as well like give them something to do. Equity is really important. So if you're a CA, you probably have some authority at the competition. If you suspect that someone has been picked as an equity officer who is not someone you would want to have to deal with a legit equity crisis, then speak up. And I'll talk a lot more about this in another video, and I'll try to be calm when I do so. But just as a CA, please take equity seriously. It is so important, man. Like, they're kids. Alright, so I'll do a video about convening in the near future, and everyone's favourite topic, dealing with teachers. Some pro tips from a teacher who used to deal with teachers, still deals with teachers. Okay, thank you very much for watching. I hope this was useful. As always, questions, comments, email, comment below, whatever. We're here to help. That's why we exist.